Hello, and welcome to the Critical Legal AI Literacies speaker series, sponsored by the Lillian Goldman Law Library through the generous support of the Oscar M. Reebhausen Fund at Yale Law School. Earlier this year, the vice president of a legal tech company was quoted saying of the use of generative AI in law practice, ethics is something we should not talk about. Hallucinations are things we should not talk about. So in this series, we're bringing experts on AI from across disciplines to Yale Law School to talk about just those things. It's an honor to introduce our first speaker, Emily Bender, joining us via Zoom from Seattle, Washington. Professor Bender is a linguist who works on multilingual grammar engineering, technology for endangered language documentation, computational semantics, and methodologies for supporting consideration of impacts language technology in NLP research, development, and education. She's the Howard and Frances Nostrand Endowed Professor of Linguistics at the University of Washington. She is also the author, with Alex Hanna, of the AI Con, How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want. Thank you so much, Professor Bender, for joining us today.
Talk. Good afternoon out there. It's still morning in Seattle. My hope is to make this as interactive as possible. So I'm going to try to keep this first part that's a presentation to just 20 minutes. We'll see. There's a little bit.ly link on the bottom there that will come back on the last slide. That will bring you to a PDF copy of my slides. I do that mostly so that you can get access to the bibliography if you want it. My title today is Large Language Models and the Lawyer's Search for Meaning. I'm going to start you off with some headlines. So in June of 2023, I think the story started a bit earlier, but in 2023, we learned about these lawyers who got sanctioned for using fake ChatGPT cases in a legal brief. And when I saw this story, I thought, oh dear, because I'm a computational linguist, I know how this technology works. I know that synthetic text extruding machines are not a good source of information. And I was very sorry to see that this lawyer had fallen for the marketing and thought otherwise. And then in December, when there was another case, I thought, man, do lawyers not gossip? Like, how did the first lawyer getting in trouble for this not lead to the entire field realizing what a bad idea it was? But apparently, y'all don't gossip enough because it keeps happening. And there's actually a wonderful database that's being maintained by Damien Charlatan, I guess that's how you say his name, if you want to get more details of more of these. And unfortunately, it's also not just lawyers, but also policymakers turning to large language models as what they imagine to be tools for creating policy, also judges and magistrates in various places. And so I am very pleased to have this chance to talk to you today about what this technology really is and why you shouldn't be using it. So I'm going to give you a brief overview and history of language models, talk some about the difference between form and meaning and why it is that language models don't actually understand and therefore can't do any reasoning. And then I have a few thoughts for you about automation and legal practice, spoken as an outsider, because I am not a lawyer. I do not have training in your field, including some thoughts on what Donna Haraway calls the God trick and how that plays out in the field of so-called artificial intelligence and how it might be playing out in law. So back to the computational linguistics. What's a language model? A better term for this would be corpus model. A corpus is a collection of texts. What a language model does is, given a collection of texts, some corpus representing some language or languages, it allows you to answer the question, how likely is a given string of words to appear? The earliest ones were what were called n-gram language models, where gram means word and n is a number. And this goes back to the work of Claude Shannon in the 1940s. So a unigram language model just gives you the relative frequency of single words. A bigram gives you the relative frequency of words given one previous word. Trigram, relative frequency of words given two previous words, etc. What are these good for? Well, for example, if you think about your spell check system where you have a range of possible words that garbled thing might have been and they are ranked in some order, that ranking is done by a language model. We can also use language models in the process of automatic transcription, where you have a model that goes from the audio signal to a range of possible strings that it might have been. And then the language model allows us to say, okay, which one of these looks the most likely given what we know about distribution of words in this language? Similarly, for machine translation, And I don't know if anyone in the audience is old enough to remember, but simplified text entry systems like T9. So back in the day when you were sending text messages on an old dumb phone, prior to T9, if you wanted to type the word home, you would have to hit the 4 twice to get to the H, the 6 3 times to get to the O, the 6 once more to get the M, and then the 3 2 times to get to the E. That was tedious. And so the folks at T9 came up with the idea that you could actually just hit each number once and then use a language model to figure out what word that might have been. So against a dictionary of possible words, and then information about which ones are more likely. Problem was, these tiny little devices couldn't hold very much data on them. And so we could only use unigram language models. And so home and good always the same, and you would always get good first because that's the more frequent word in the English language, no matter the context. All right. These days, the kinds of language models that we work with are called neural language models. They're called neural because they're based on this thing called a neural net, which is not actually an artificial mind or artificial brain, despite the term. That's an old term that was developed in the 1950s, where Rosenblatt and others were creating mathematical models based on a simplified version of a 1940s understanding of how neurons worked. And today's neural nets are basically just very large collections of these mathematical functions connected up together. So what we're doing these days with neural language models is we have one of these very large sets of mathematical functions. These things are developed by giving them lots and lots of text. And at each step in the training process, the question is, what's a likely word to come next? If the system gets it wrong, then weights in the system are updated to make it more likely that it would have gotten it right the next time. So that's all that's going on. We're basically repeatedly asking the question, what's a likely next word? Did we get it right? If not, okay, let's try to make it a little bit more likely that we got it right. And there's been a lot of clever math and computer science that's gone into this to make these things very good at mimicking or closely modeling the distribution of word forms in text. Among other things, they represent words not as just the particular letters, but as something called embeddings, which is a mathematical vector that represents a word in terms of what other words it has been seen with in the text. A lot of work also to make these things more performant. So what are these things good for? We get much smoother automatic transcription and machine translation output. They're used for query expansion and search. So when you type in whatever words you are typing into your search engine, you get back results that match similar words as well. Sometimes that's what you want, sometimes it's not. We now, instead of just spell checkers, have grammar checkers because we can detect words that are not only not in the dictionary, but actually in the dictionary, but unlikely in context. This gets us autocorrect. And those word embeddings have given us dramatic improvements to almost every kind of language technology. In fact, conferences in my field got really boring for a while there in the late 2010s when everyone's like, hey, let's try word embeddings, number go up. Those are not very interesting papers. All right, so all of this has been turned into something called generative AI through a marketing trick, basically. What's happened is rather than using these systems for ranking a range of possible strings that were given to us by some other process, we're turning that process inside out and repeatedly asking what word comes next. If you repeatedly ask what word comes next, what you get is synthetic text that looks extremely plausible, but doesn't correspond to anything that anybody was trying to say. It has no accountability. Nobody is accountable for what's in that text. Generative AI also is a cover term for other kinds of synthetic media, so audio, image, video as well. It is not artificial intelligence in any sense that you might have imagined from watching science fiction movies, nor is it artificial general intelligence or a step towards that. It is just synthetic media because we've built machines that can mimic how we use language. All right, it is, I'm going to keep harping on this, really important to understand that chatbots or large language models are in fact a parlor trick that plays on your ability to make sense of language. As I've been trying to explain, a language model is a model of the distribution of word spellings in some collection of text. That's it. But the ones we have today are very effective at mimicking how people use language, that is, what words we say in what order. And because we are used to encountering language only when it comes from someone like us, that is, someone who can think and someone who uses language for communicative purposes, these things end up providing the illusion of reasoning or intelligence. And I want to elaborate this on a little bit more. You might think that when you are understanding something that someone wrote or said, what you're doing is simply unpacking the meaning that they packed into those words. But in fact, it is much more complicated than that and much more involved. What we do, and this is coming from psycholinguistics and pragmatics, which are subfields of linguistics. When we understand language, what we're doing is we are keeping in mind everything we know about the other person, everything we know or believe about what we have in the common ground with that person, everything we know or believe about what they know or believe about their intended audience, which might have been us or might have been someone else. And against that background, we are then answering the question for ourselves, what must they have been trying to convey by choosing those words and in that order? And a key part of that is, in order to do all that work, we have to imagine a mind behind the text. And that's fine and useful when we're talking about language that came from another person. But when we're talking about language that was extruded by one of these synthetic text extruding machines that has no mind behind it, we have to remember that the mind we're imagining is something that we are purely projecting, and it exists in our own processing and not in the machine. All right, I've got a few different ways that I try to make vivid how it is that language models can't possibly be understanding. The first one comes from a paper I wrote in 2019, published in 2020, together with Alexander Kohler. This is a thought experiment involving a hyper-intelligent deep sea octopus, not because I think a language model is intelligent, but because I'm trying to set that issue aside, right? We're just positing that this thing is intelligent and showing that even if it were, it couldn't possibly understand. So we have these two people who speak English. They are stranded on two desert islands, connected conveniently by a telegraph cable. And they while away the time by chatting to each other. And along comes this hyper-intelligent deep sea octopus who starts listening in to their conversations. Now, this is a telegraph cable, so the conversations are in English encoded in Morse code. So all that's coming across for the octopus are the dots and dashes of Morse code. The octopus doesn't know that there's people there. The octopus doesn't know that they are speaking English. The octopus doesn't know what English is, just dots and dashes. But it is very good at tracking patterns. And over time, it decides that it wants to play. So it cuts the cable because it's noticed that there's signals coming from two sides. And it starts sending signals back to A as if it were B. So when A says, what a pretty sunset, the dots and dashes come across to O, and O can guess that a likely string of dots and dashes would be the ones that B would have produced in sending reminds me of lava lamps. Now, clearly, the octopus has no idea what a lava lamp is. Some of you might not know what a lava lamp is. That's okay. It's a thing from the 1970s. Then A says, I made a coconut catapult. Let me tell you how. And O sends back dots and dashes that B might have sent in a similar context, like cool idea, great job. And then, because this is a thought experiment and we can do things like spherical cows or magically appearing bears, a bear appears on A's island and A says, help, I'm being chased by a bear. And O, at this point, we like to say, this is where A would figure out that they were no longer corresponding with B, if they hadn't already, if they managed to survive the bear attack. When we were writing this paper, the GPT system that was available for playing with was GPT-2, so we tried it out and we got responses like, oh yeah, it says, all I have is this stick, what can I do? And we thought, okay, what would we get out of GPT-2 in this context? And O says, the bear is chasing me, and you're not going to get away with this, which are completely useless, of course. All right, another thought experiment that might help you understand why it is that a language model that's only looking at the form of language can't possibly understand. In the previous one, we had English, but in dots and dashes. This time, I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself in the National Library of Thailand. And this thought experiment works if you don't speak or read Thai. If you do speak or read Thai, you could put this instead in the Parliamentary Library of Georgia. And if you speak and read both Thai and Georgian, I would really love to meet you. So you're in the National Library of Thailand. You have unlimited time, unlimited delicious Thai food, but no people to interact with. And I have gone through before you and I have taken out all documents with images or non-Thai text. And the question is, could you learn Thai? How? What would you do, right? the various answers that I get are things like, well, I would go through and I would find recurring sequences and figure out that those are likely function words. And sure, right? You could learn something about Thai. You would be doing that by bringing in external knowledge, which a language model can't do, and it wouldn't get you to understanding. Or someone might say, I'm just going to look and look and look until I find a book that I can just tell is the Thai translation of The Lord of the Rings, and then I will have a leg up. Okay, again, sure, this is bringing in external information. And I also get answers like, I just sit there and eat the Thai food. Also great, you wouldn't learn Thai. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that something like ChatGPT isn't understanding. If it isn't understanding, then it's not reasoning. And if it's not reasoning, then it's not actually doing the things that it's been promised to do. But wouldn't it be so wonderfully useful if, right, ChatGPT is being sold as a general purpose answer machine. I'm sure you're seeing legal tech that's being sold as if it could do really useful things, answer all your questions, do all your research for you. I think that even if these things were functional in the way promised, they would still have no place in the practice of law. And my reason for that is that I don't think that the practice of law is just a matter of finding the right text snippets and putting them in the right place. And I would really love for you to reflect on what it is that lawyers do when you write a legal brief or do an analysis or search for precedents, and what it would mean to offload that work to an automated process. What would have to be true of the system that you are offloading it to? And also, what does that mean about what your work is if you can offload that part? Not saying that we can't automate anything, but I think we should think about what conditions are for appropriate automation. I think we need to have real good specificity of what's being automated. Tools are tools for something, so we can evaluate how well they work for that specific thing we've asked them to do. And also so we can build them so that they are transparent to the user about what they actually can and do, right? Furthermore, there's questions of accountability. Somebody has to be accountable for the system working as advertised, and people who use the system have to be accountable for using it appropriately. And I don't think that a system where you could just go to it and say, write me a legal brief, could possibly meet these conditions. And now to the point about the God trick. So this comes from Donna Haraway's article, where she talks about the importance of positionality. And this is an article about science and how when we understand something, there is no objective outsider point of view. There is no view from nowhere, but rather everyone is seeing from somewhere. And we do better science and we do better scholarship when we own that. And the push that we're getting right now towards so-called artificial intelligence is this idea that we could have all-knowing answer machines, that any question you could possibly articulate has a definitive answer, and that answer could be provided due simply to the processing of enough text. So this is basically saying not only is it possible to have that view from nowhere, but that we could build a machine that has it. And that's not true, and it's dehumanizing, and it's harmful to science, it's harmful to scholarship. And thinking about this, and here, this is really me, as an outsider making a suggestion. When I think about people trying to automate the process of law, it seems to me that they're taking the idea that legal systems are functions that have inputs and outputs, and that these functions can be applied most ideally when they're applied mechanically, as opposed to the idea of legal systems as structures that we build to better treat each other fairly, and that we work within as people to do that fairer treatment. I'm really curious to hear what you all have to say about that. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with a thought from Weizenbaum. This is the computer scientist who created the very first chatbot in 1966, who then was shocked and horrified at how people reacted to the chatbot and wrote a wonderful book in 1976 called Computer Power and Human Reason, of which this is a quote. Computers can make judicial decisions. Computers can make psychiatric judgments. They can flip coins in much more sophisticated ways than can the most patient human being. The point is that they ought not be given such tasks. What emerges as the most elementary insight is that since we do not now have any ways of making computers wise, we ought not now to give computers tasks that demand wisdom. So just to give you the outline of where we were, give you a very brief overview and history of language models, talked about the difference of form and meaning and why language models don't understand, and then some thoughts on automation and legal practice. There's the URL again for the slides, and also a little plug for my book if you'd like to learn more. And I will leave this up for now, I think, until I'm told that you would rather have a ginormous image of my face on the screen. And I look forward to your questions.